位来到中间之声，中国和澳大利亚的播客访谈节目。Welcome to the middle。此节目是从 2SER 广播电台播出。今天的话题有关在澳大利亚的中国留学生。
Welcome to The Middle, the show about one of the most vital debates in Australia, the rise of China and what it means for our country, the region and the world. We are coming to you from 2SER studios in the heart of Sydney on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation. My name is Peter Fray. I'm the co-director of the Centre for Media Transition, and joining me today is my co-presenter and esteemed colleague from the University of Technology, Wan-ning Sun. You can hear The Middle on 2SER across the Community Broadcast Network and on your favorite podcast app. And even better still, you can see it with Mandarin subtitles on YouTube. More details about that at the end of the show. So, Wan-ning, we better explain why we call this show The Middle.
Well, there could be a number of reasons. First of all, Australia is caught in the middle between the US and China. And secondly, China is actually called the Middle Kingdom, right? And thirdly, I would say many people in Australia feel that they actually get stuck in the middle of the China-Australia debate.
Well, that's right, Wan-ning. I mean, there is a productive sort of middle path, we think, in this hot and divisive debate. And we want to shed some light, not heat, on the issues that come out of this very interesting and complex and, let's face it, historical relationship. So does that cover everything, Wan-ning?
Not quite. I would say that if you can be philosophical about this, there is always the Confucius idea of the being in the middle, right? 中庸之道, right? And Aristotle's idea of the golden mean also, becomes relevant here.
Oh, that's very well said, Wan-ning. I always learn something by being with you. Today's show is all about international students. Currently, 500,000 international students are enrolled in Australian institutions and schools, and Australia exports, education exports is our third largest export, and it's estimated to be worth about $28 billion a year. And of course, the biggest cohort of international students in Australia are from China, Chinese students. So as the debate about China-Australian relationships hots up, Chinese students are increasingly in the eye of the storm. There are all sorts of things flying around. There's allegations about the perceived pro-China activities of Chinese students. There are claims that Chinese students are coming here to somehow infiltrate our universities and steal our technology. And then there is this tendency in the Australian media to demonize Chinese students.
In other words, they are one of the people's cohorts that are caught in the middle of the debate, really.
Well, that's right. That's right, Wan-ning. So many Chinese students love living and studying in Australia, but challenges persist, right? They range from mental health and the well-being of international students to the inadequate provision of housing and everyday support for learning difficulties.
Yeah, well, most of the media stories written about the international students from China tend to sort of suggest that the students from China are either working for the Chinese Communist Party or they're somehow the mouthpiece of the People's Republic of China. But actually, very, very few journalists who write about Chinese students bother to sit down with them actually and find out from themselves what their lives is like and what their views are.
That's right. Very, very few people actually sit down with students, write their stories, and the people who make commentary very rarely bother to actually ask the students themselves. So what are their experiences here? What are their difficulties? What are their challenges? What are their dreams and hopes? And what can we, perhaps wanting as teachers or the government or local community, do to help them?
That's right. So today, in this episode, we're going to do precisely that. So our guests here today, three of them, represent a very diverse range of Chinese students. We have Sun Liangyu from Sydney University, and we have Zhang Yi in the studio also with us. And also on the phone, we have Joni Wong from Melbourne RMIT. So welcome to you all.
So I'm going to say a little bit about our guests, and then we're going to go into some questions. So Liang, you're a second-year student doing a Bachelor's of International and Global Studies, majoring in Sociology at University of Sydney. Sociology.
Yes.
That's an interesting subject.
Yes, I love it.
What made you pick that?
I was originally interested in a lot of social issues in China when I was in high school. and we always have debates with our friends. And I think it might be one of my major interests. So I picked sociology, and I could learn a lot of like theories to help me analyze those social issues in universities. So that's the reason why.
No, I'm sure you are learning lots of great theories, but you're going to put them into practice as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
great stuff. You're a postdoctoral research associate at UTS.
That's right.
Fine university that it is, of course. Before that, you were also a PhD student at UTS, and you've been in Australia about 4.5 years.
That's right.
And tell us a little bit about your research.
Okay, my research is how to develop and apply some information technologies to solve the real-world issues on like science policy and entrepreneurships. So just one example, we try to identify some key technologies in some given technological area. So we could use this kind of, we say, insights or we say intelligence to support companies to do the investments or do some R&D plans.
Okay, so you examine what the affordances of those technologies and...
Actually, we do not specifically focus on some technologies. We just want to develop some methodologies, and these methodologies can adapt to different kinds of areas. Yeah.
Fantastic work, really very important work as well, right?
Hope so.
And joining us on WeChat is Joni Wong, who's a fourth-year undergraduate student studying construction management at Melbourne's RMIT. And you arrived in Australia when you were 17, and we've talked about it a little bit when we were off air, but you love Star Trek. Tell us how you're going with that RMIT, and tell us a little bit about your Trekkie past or your Trekkie future.
I chose MIT because I want to study construction-related majors, because right now there are a lot of construction going on in China, and as we can see, Australia is also undergoing with a soaring time in real estate property, something like that. And MIT is kind of famous for it, and they provide very practical skills and classes for students.
And so you'll be sort of involved in the Belt and Road, perhaps.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a girl, but I got construction boots, I got helmets, I got everything.
Yeah.
And because there are some courses that ask for us to actually go on site to have a look.
That's great. And I should correct a misapprehension there. We're actually using Skype, not WeChat. Not that we're going to get sued by either. But anyway, Joni, it's great to have you on the show. Haven't we got, Wani, a fantastic array of guests with us today?
Absolutely. We have a great representative diversity from 3 universities and 3 student cohorts, undergraduate student and honor student, as well as postdoc, doctoral students, and 2 cities as well.
You're in good hands.
Yeah. So, Peter, allow me to start by asking, first of all, Liang Yu a question. Liang Yu, I know that before you came here, we had a bit of exchange, and I know that you somehow had feel quite strongly about the fact that a lot of media commentators talked about the Chinese students as if to suggest that the behavior of Chinese students were not, sort of preventing the teachers to exercise their rights of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. But you also feel that the students' own right to free speech themselves have not been respected. So do you want to say a little bit to that thought?
Yes, I thought that news was around several months ago. It's probably last semester. Maybe some Chinese students speak out about like the Taiwan issues, which is very sensitive, in their class. And so this was released in some local media saying like the Chinese students is not helpful for the Australian freedom of speech. But I feel like some of the Chinese students, like they have their own right to speak of their own kind of opinion, whatever about like maybe Taiwan. Maybe it's very debating.
The presumption there is that the Chinese students actually don't have a right to speak, right?
Yes, but I think the newspapers assume that Chinese students have like no rights to speak out their opinions, and every opinion they spoke out was like controlled by other people or parties, some kind of things. So I think that's unfair. Yeah.
It's unfair, it's undemocratic, and it's not what Australia stands for. Let's talk a little bit about language for a second. Language is an issue in learning. Frankly, sometimes it's English is an issue for Australian students, so let alone Chinese ones. So, you've done a lot of study in this country. Did you, when you came here, or as you've been here, have you developed strategies around overcoming any language differences? Because you have fantastic English, I should say.
Thank you for that. So actually, the first time I had ever been abroad is not in Australia, it's in the United States. I had ever been in the United States for 1 year, in Atlanta for exchange study there. So actually, at the first 3 months, we have like workshops twice a week with my advisors at the Georgia Tech, actually. So, but at the beginning, I'm very afraid of this kind of conversation because I cannot understand what he was talking about. I just prefer to choose email.
Of course.
Right.
You have
So
control, yeah.
that's right. So, but at the beginning, at the early stage, I just encouraged myself to attend those workshops every time. Even I could not understand what he was talking about, I just sit there and try my best to understand a little bit, and then talked with him and reflect what I have understood. So after 3 months, actually it's Christmas holiday, then I arranged a small trip to New York City. And unfortunately, my friend's English are worse than mine. So I need to book the hotels, book the restaurants, and arrange some car renting, something issues like this. When I returned from the holiday, when I appeared in the workshop again, then I realized, well, I can understand what my supervisor were talking about. So
of course. And
I
of course,
think
that's how you learn language, right?
that's right. I think just to practice more and more. Yeah.
So your advice to your fellow students is to don't be afraid, speak up and practice.
That's right,
Yes,
yeah.
That's good. That's good. Now, Junie, I have a question for you. I know that you have done quite a bit of volunteer work, mentoring other international students who have less experiences for living abroad than you have. So maybe you could share with us some of your experience with international students, especially those ones who have just arrived. And what are some of their difficulties? Do they feel lonely, or do they feel a bit scared, or what are they scared about?
Yes, because in my mentor program, the name is Making Connections. So we mostly just connect with the student that just arrived and having foundation studies in the university. So it is like prior to their graduate studies. And I think the most important issue for them is to like finding a place to live and dealing with all the like connections to the energies, the water, electricity. That's very minor things. Sometimes even the university cannot give any help. So I think in the beginning stage, most of students do not really worry about the studies, about how to actually live in here, and to find the tram stop, how to recharge. My mobile phone has recharged the Mickey card. We got a Mickey card here. It's a transportation card or something like that.
I still don't know how to do that.
Yeah, so mostly like that.
Yeah, so these are very practical issues that we don't really think much about because we just take them for granted. But for new arrivals, they're really survival issues, aren't they?
Yeah.
Can I turn to you for a second? So you're one of many doctoral researchers from China who come to Australia, many in UTS, and we're very happy about that, who come to Australia to pursue research in science. So can you tell us a little bit about what's the most commonly experienced difficulty in studying in Australia? And also, though, just to be a little bit pointy here, what do you think of this idea that's been floated recently that some students are basically working for the Chinese military and are coming here to steal our secrets?
Okay. The first thing, I think the common things between the two education system. So based on my understanding at the university level, especially the academic level, the research level, is mostly similar. So China is encourage researchers to exchange ideas with international researchers, the same as Australia. So we are doing the similar things. So, but I think in the undergraduate level is a little bit different because I have never attended any undergraduate courses in Australia, but I had ever been a little bit tutorials. So at UTS. So based on my understanding, so in Chinese universities, maybe the students are learning what the teacher are teaching, the exact thing. But in Australia, sometimes, for example, the teacher will teach 30%, then the students need to extend learning the extra, maybe 50%. Then if you want to achieve 100%, you need to contribute more to contribute more, to do more efforts. So based on this kind of understanding, I think for the undergraduate age level study, Australian university or the United States universities are better than Chinese universities. And that's why I think at the moment, like the university rankings, you would see the Chinese #1 university like Peking University or Tsinghua University are still not the top 10 level in the world.
Yes, yes.
So I think that's a gap between Chinese universities and the Western countries' universities.
Okay.
Language issue might be one, but another one is the structure of the
This kind of idea of having to stretch, the stretch target kind of idea.
That's right.
Yeah.
And another thing, the question regarding to the government issue, I don't agree with that one, the first thing. So I think every student, every Chinese student had their own right to choose their own way. For example, for myself, I got my bachelor degree and my first PhD degree in China. And during my first PhD degree, I exchanged studying in the United States. Then I got my second PhD degree in Australia. Then at the moment, I decided to stay in Australia and find some positions and maybe live at stay at university at UTS. Then that's maybe my career development. So even I get some scholarship maybe several or many years ago from the Chinese government, but the government will not say, okay, you get money from my side, you need to work for me. No, I never get this kind of certainty from Chinese government. They give me money just to want to do my better self-development. When I finish my study, I have my right to decide I need to return to China or stay in Australia. Yeah.
And I think one of the other parts of this debate about whether Chinese students are here to sort of collaborate with, if you like, Australians or Americans and then take the technology is that the nature of academic knowledge is that it's all published in journals which
That's
are
right.
peer-reviewed and open source.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
what are you stealing? Well,
Actually,
you're giving the world knowledge,
But
right?
I think I have this kind of expertise to answering this question because my research exact word is bibliometrics. We try to use information technologies to understand thousands or million publications. So that's to say, all these like solar cells, like nanotechnologies, all the researchers will publish their work and it's open access.
Okay.
If you buy SWIL's, buy Springer's database, you can get everything. So then you cannot say the Chinese scholar learned something from those kind of secret technologies, then contribute them to their own country. I think that's unfair.
And you're not working for the PLA.
Of course, no.
Okay. You're listening to The Middle, the show that's dedicated to exploring the relationship between China and Australia. We're joined in the studio today by Sun Liangyu from Sydney University and Zhang Yi from UTS. And also joining us on WeChat is Junie Wong from RMIT in Melbourne. Peter.
Thanks, Walling. Leanne, you have read one of the key texts that have emerged in this debate, Clive Hamilton's Silent Invasion.
Yes.
How did that make you feel? What's your response to that book?
I think, I think people who have like basic independent thinking would not trust that kind of book because they have a very basic assumption that like every every Chinese student or say any Chinese person is like influenced by or like what you have asked Zhang Yi was controlled by
the PLA or the PRC. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
And I think it's very unfair or uncomfortable. Like makes me uncomfortable for every like Chinese people in Australia.
Did it make you feel less welcome?
I do. But after I asked some of my Australian friends, like, do you believe that kind of book? They're like, oh no, I've like university friends, and they're like, I don't believe that kind of book. So that makes me feel a bit relieved. But overall, this kind of book makes me feel uncomfortable and unwelcomed. And because I'm just a person who come to Australia for 2 years, but for other Chinese people or maybe Chinese Australians who has been there for 10 years around, I think they maybe feel more uncomfortable because they feel their contributions to the Australian society has been ignored, and they were portrayed like those kind of political tools in that kind of book.
I guess you defend Clive Hamilton's right to write that book. Be in a
Yes, they have the right to write, but we also have the right to write some comments or reviews to against that kind of publications.
Yeah.
That's great.
A follow-up question for you, Liang Yu. As a student from China, now studying in Australia, what would you say your biggest concern or biggest fear is? And also, what would be your biggest hope will be?
The biggest fear, this is very
concern, that's something, anything that worries you as a student. Yeah. What's on,
It's a very tricky question. Yeah, I don't particularly have very biggest fear, but sometimes I feel uncomfortable. Yeah, moments I was just normally walk on the street, but I was discriminated, or our university have some discriminating graffitis against the Asian people. That makes me feel uncomfortable, but I don't have very fear about this. Yeah, because I believe that it's just part of the people who is doing this, but it's not represent all of the Australian people are all discriminating Asian people.
You did mention discrimination on the street or on campus. Are there some of the examples that you personally have experienced or your friends have experienced?
I think many of my friends and I personally have some experience. One day I was walking on the street and to catch the bus in the bus stop, and suddenly I found that a discriminating graffiti on the bus stop wall. We have a glass wall and have seats for people who waiting for the bus, and it's it's a very discriminating graffiti with people's eyes like the ching chong graffiti, and makes me very feel uncomfortable about that. But we immediately report that to our students' newspaper called Honey Swat in University of Sydney, and it was partly solved.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the graffiti that Liang Yu was referring. Was that on the university campus?
Yes.
As well?
Okay. So you've been listening to The Middle with me, Peter Frey, and Wanning Sun, and we're talking to three fantastic Chinese students, two in the studio, one on Skype from Melbourne. Thank you, Leanne, Yi, and Joni. Wanning, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. Another question for you, Yi. We've noticed that the level of interaction between the local Australian students and international students hasn't been that high. As teachers, we like to see more interactions between local students and international students, and we're always trying to struggle to make that happen. So, from your point of view, the students' point of view, what are the obstacles which you think prevent the Chinese students from integrating in the classroom teaching?
Okay, so the first thing I think is a comparative examples from my stories in the United States. So when I was in Atlanta, there are not so many Chinese students there. So I have no other option except making friends with local students. So, but when I arrived in Sydney, so at the beginning I lived in Hurstville. That's the suburb you can live without English for the entire day,
Indeed.
So then I realized, okay, I can meet many Chinese students. I can talk them in Chinese, and no need for me to meet with local friends. So I think that's an issue. Maybe not a bad one, but sometimes two ways, positive and negative, because there are so many Chinese there. So we can easy to find help from Chinese friends. So this kind of issue stop us to move further to meet with some foreign local students. And another one is, I think, is language issue. Sometimes like students arrived here, maybe this their first time being abroad, so their language is not so good. So it's not easy for them to communicate with local students. So okay, so the same thing, I can talk in Chinese students in Chinese in one sentence, in 1 minute, but with local students, I need to spend 10 minutes to explain this kind of issue. Oh, I don't want to do this. So I think language issue is one. Okay, one more. And another thing I think is cultural difference.
Yeah.
Because sometimes this kind of way, we could not deep involved with this kind of communication.
Yeah, so the cultural as well as language issues.
That's right.
What about Liang Yu? Do you also have something to share about?
Yes, because I was once worked as an international mentor as well in the Faculty of Arts and Social Science in UC. And the mentoring program was originally open for all the students, including international students and local students. But I found interestingly, all the international students who come to this mentoring program are either from the English-speaking backgrounds, like English descendants, or New Zealanders, or they come here in their junior high or high school, so they have very excellent English skills. So those Chinese students who really need help with their English language skills won't come to this kind of mentoring program because
That's interesting.
they firstly feel
So
very
how do you
afraid.
reach those students? Because they're the people who need it, as you say.
Yes, so I need to mention that the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, they officially publish informations before the whole week, because the mentoring program is part of the whole week to attract all the international students and local students to participate in this program. But Chinese international students who have poorer language skills are very afraid to join in this program. And they join other language programs hosted by old Chinese international students, so they can speak Chinese in those mentoring programs. And instead of joining those official tours hosted by the Faculty of Arts and Social Science.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the problem. And but fortunately, they added some international mentoring programs there, so that encouraged students who speak poorer English to also join in this program. Because when I was in year 1, I was the mentee there, and for the whole mentoring program, no specific program for international students, and all of my other mentees in this group are local students. And I feel very frustrated because they are talking about things they are familiar with. Like they're talking about the suburbs they're living in, the high schools they are studying, or Australian cultures, which I'm not familiar with. So I feel very isolated and lonely. But so the next year I decided to become an international mentor.
Right.
Yeah.
Part of this is about the other side of this coin, Junie. If I could just bring you in here. So we're talking a lot about the students, perhaps things that the students can do, the Chinese students can do. But what do you think the teachers can do? Perhaps the non-Chinese teachers that you have, do they have to change their behaviors in some way, do you think, without getting into trouble?
Yeah, so actually from my experience, sometimes even the local students are not feeling comfortable with Asian students. I'm not only talking about Chinese students, with Asian students, because their backgrounds are different, their language is different, and sometimes some professors are really, I see their efforts that they are trying to mingle local students with international students, but that kind of move is not really successful because the ways they're doing their assignments, they're going to lectures, they're different. Like most in my construction stream, most local students prefer to do their work until the last minute, and they're getting to prepare for all the things they need in the last week. But most Asian students, from my perspective, they prefer to start working 1 to 2 months earlier.
Yeah, right.
And so it's a kind of different ways of doing. But I see how the teachers, they're really trying hard to sometimes even set a little meetings for international students to see if they have their questions, they're studying for their assignments. They're trying their best to help them. But
Yeah, so in a way, they might be trying a bit too hard.
Yes, I can see there sometimes it's too hard because they're kind of forcing the student to dragging them out of the comfort zone. And the things getting really awkward in the end.
Okay. Then we've got time for one more question.
I'd like to ask some Liang Yu and Zhang Yi, because the US students from based in New South Wales. I heard that some of you are agitating for the local government to change their transport concession policy so that you guys can be entitled to a student concession in the same way that the local students are. Has that been resolved?
There are some protests and also students who are advocating you to sign up the petitions to give that to the government, but it hasn't been solved, I think.
So you're still paying full fee for your transport?
Yes, because I think UC has a more intense political, those kind of thing. And we feel that it's unfair. And we both as students in universities, but international students are paying as normal adults in New South Wales for the concession card fee, but the local students are paying half of the price of us.
Is that the same in Melbourne, Johnny?
It's kind of similar, but sometimes the students' concession, because I haven't used concession cards for a really long while, but I've heard that if you really want to get a lower price, you have to be the kind of student that take trams every day, that you're actually receiving any benefits, or that it will be much higher than a period pass or something.
Yes, this sounds like a very trivial sort of practical issues, but they're actually to students who have to watch their dollars. This is actually quite an important everyday matter. So, it's something that I think that the local government really need to take into account. Really.
Well, let's hope they listen to this show and do something about it. Wanting, I think that just about wraps up this week's edition of The Middle. I'd like to thank Liang Su, Yi Zhang and Johnny Wang for being such wonderful guests and taking time to come into the studio or be on Skype from Melbourne. If you missed anything from today's show, please check out the podcast on the 2SER website at 2ser.com or the podcast deliverer of your choice. And for Mandarin speakers, this show will be in Mandarin subtitles. A version of this will go on YouTube very soon. So just search 2SER The Middle. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, Peter Frey.
And it's goodbye from me, Wan Ning San, and see you next time.
Thank you for listening.